Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Almost Human. A man named Mark Fisher, who was presumably abducted by aliens 2 years previous before the events of this film, and then his friend and girlfriend, or fiance, I think it was a girlfriend, they were living together, so they were pretty close, have moved on since and have to deal with the criminal investigation and trying to figure out what happened to him to no avail, and then he comes back as a murdering, stalking kind of pod person, and they have to save themselves while also trying to find out exactly what happened to their friend Mark. Almost Human, I guess you could say, is a throwback horror film to especially John Carpenter. It's incredibly influenced by John Carpenter. So influenced, in fact, the actual font of the opening credits is exactly like the font of John Carpenter's usual opening credits. They definitely are very influenced by his films like The Thing and Halloween. When you're so influenced by something, I think it's often hard when you're not really saying anything with it to really appreciate it beyond thinking about how much better that influence is than the actual film you're watching. And I felt that a lot with Almost Human. It seems to take out all the ambiance and the foreboding and the anticipation that Carpenter had and just want to show you a lot of gore. So it's a lot less fun and it's a lot less scary. There are certainly scary parts to it, but the thing about doing these throwback films is, you know, I had seen a film I really like Ninja Shadow of a Tear, certainly is throwing back to the 80s, but it's almost becoming its own, like an actual cult movie. But actually works as like an organic cult film. Even though it might be influenced by other things, it knows what it's doing with itself. It has a kind of at least either a theory or a fun to it. Something that gets you through. And I think this on-demand market currently works really well with kind of B stuff. But this is almost too B. It's almost too cheap and too interested in the gore and not interested in the scares or really saying anything. And I think especially when I notice directors, whether it's this or like Super 8, they try to reference or be heavily influenced by these directors who came out at the end of the 70s and 80s who are very much postmodern filmmakers. In John Carpenter's case, he was very influenced by Howard Hawks. I don't see any attempt at doing anything Hawksian within this film. That someone who would go to such lengths to make a film a lot like what Carpenter's doing and not really understand exactly what he was doing. It almost felt like the director was saying to me, well, you know, it was really, this stuff was cool and I wanted to have that experience how I experienced these John Carpenter films in the basement as a kid. Maybe a better director could have gotten that to work, but certainly the director of this film, Joe Begos, he could definitely make a plain kind of normal genre horror film, but that's about it. And this film kind of tries to demand it's more than it is with the two main characters of Seth and Jen. I feel like they're almost like being over dramatic to kind of prove to the audience you should pay attention, when in fact there's nothing to really prove to you that you should. This film isn't really grabbing you, it's just kind of showing you the gore as quick as it can. This is a very short movie. It's only really like 72 minutes, but they actually have an 8-minute credit sequence so they could get into festivals, which I think is kind of funny. I don't really like this movie because there's just like no fun to it. I was getting really bored while watching it. I tend to actually like gory films, but there has to be like something you're doing with it. This film acts like it might be, but it isn't. It's heavily referenced by other horror directors, but it doesn't seem to understand why they became the names they were, other than violence is cool, gore is cool. I don't think he has the technique, and I understand this is like a lower budget film, and I semi-agree that this director could go on to do better things. It's not that it wasn't color corrected that well or anything like that. The camera work wasn't really that inspired. He wasn't really doing anything with the camera. It felt very standard. He clumsily brought up information. This felt more like a B movie that would influence somebody who would become better, but it didn't seem like a director who was a very good director. And I don't think this was a great, like, simple throwback 80s genre film. It doesn't really act like it's in the 80s, and I notice it's not, doesn't feel very 80s to me. I wish it hadn't been so specific in its dates, and why it needed to be in the 80s I don't really understand. Some of its references were so on the nose and so clear and easy to pick up on. I mean, there's literally a scene from Halloween, there's literally a scene from Night of the Living Dead. There's filmmakers I really like who are very influenced by other films and can get that to work for them. But this director, Joe Begos, just certainly isn't one of them. I think he's kind of hindered by it. It feels like he needs to understand what made those directors special, other than, you know, look at the cool poster, look at how cool was it when the head moved around from the thing and things like that. And Carpenter had a lot more going on within him than just, you know, look at that violence, look how cool this is. I think he could have maybe, Carpenter always pretty much made heavily Western influenced films, and it'd be really great if this film had kind of more of a Western attitude towards it, not just, you know, being a zombie film with a slasher film with an alien film. I don't think it's terrible low budget filmmaking, but it seemed to be a little more on the mystery science theater side than the inspired side, frankly, and I don't think it moved really beyond that, unfortunately. The thing with Almost Human is it's kind of like almost something we should even really give a shit about, and it's almost kind of an interesting horror movie, but unfortunately it's really not at all. It's just kind of so standard that maybe your core horror fans will get a kick out of it, but I doubt they'd remember it in a couple of years. Maybe he would go on to do something, you know, inspired and interesting, but I really didn't see the evidence within Almost Human. So if you have seen Almost Human and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.